My parents never visited me in the ICU. Instead, they plotted to take guardianship. I stayed silent and made them call me in desperation. Later. For weeks I had an uneasy sense that something was wrong, but I ignored it as I always did. It wasn't the first time I ignored warning indications: headaches, dizziness, and an occasional tightness in my chest. Because the reality is, I didn't believe I could afford to slow down. Not while I was helping my mother with her vehicle payment and my sister Nora was texting me every 2 days, asking for a fast loan. And certainly not when my father continued to blame me for his delayed mortgage payment. That is the part that folks do not understand. They see the photo-perfect family posts and assume everything is good. They don't understand what it's like to grow up as the only son in a family where you're constantly the background character. My sisters Nora and Clara might smash a car and still be commended for learning something important. I once won a statewide engineering prize, and my mother's sole comment was, "Oh, cool. Did you thank your teacher?" I no longer wanted attention. I simply wanted something back. Perhaps a sliver of thankfulness. But it wasn't in the cards. So I worked. I worked through the weekends. I paid bills that I shouldn't have. And I assured myself everything was good until that Monday afternoon. I was at my desk, almost halfway through preparing a presentation for a key customer. I recall standing up to get a folder from the printer, and then seeing nothing but black. I awoke to beeps, frigid lights, wires attached to my chest, and a nurse changing a drip. It felt weird, like something out of a movie. But it was genuine, and it was not a panic attack, dehydration, or tiredness. It was a full-blown cardiac episode. The doctor indicated it may have been worse if I hadn't collapsed straight in the office. Someone contacted 911 right away. My co-workers were the reason I could still breathe. The hospital personnel was great, courteous and competent, and when they noticed I didn't have anyone at my bedside hours later, they informed me that they had already phoned my emergency contacts, my parents. I waited. I waited for 2 days. Nothing. No texts, visits, or phone calls. Then, on the 3rd day, I awoke after a nap and checked my phone, assuming the signal had vanished. There was simply one notification. A tag on Instagram. Nora sent us a photo of her, Clara, and our parents seated around a picnic table at the lake, all smiling. My mother had even prepared her specialty deviled eggs. The caption hit me more than the fall ever had. Family day without drama. And yeah, they tagged me like if I were an inside joke, as if I wasn't half dead in a hospital bed while they were giggling about potato salad. I did not respond. I stared at the screen till it faded. Something cracked within me that day. Not in a loud, aggressive tone, but in a calm, definitive manner. Like a door closing with no intention of ever reopening. I kept recuperating slowly. The physicians were monitoring my heart and performing tests. I rarely spoke unless I had to. And still, no word from my family until 4 days later. I awoke to 74 missed calls and a text from my father. "We need you. Respond immediately. No apologies. There is no, 'How are you?' Just those words." I'm not sure what I expected, but I didn't hesitate. I sat up, still weak and attached to machines, and without hesitation dialed back, but not to them. I phoned someone else. I stared at my father's text for about a minute. "We need you. Respond immediately." It's been 4 days without a word. 74 missed calls, but that was what they started with. Not, "How are you?" or, "Are you okay?" I didn't panic. I felt nothing. Just a dead quiet that replaced whatever feeling used to arise during such moments. I then remembered a number. I hadn't used this number in a long time. One I had preserved with a name I never deleted. Gramps. I had not called him in months. Not because we weren't close, but because I knew how he felt about the rest of the family, and was too humiliated to say he was correct again. But, that morning, I called him. He picked up on the second ring as if he had been waiting. They didn't inquire how I was doing. I just asked which hospital. That was it. There was no hesitancy, no questioning, no passive-aggressive silence, simply a quick reaction that made me feel important. That was something I had not felt in years. He arrived 40 minutes later. He looked exactly the same old windbreaker. He'd been wearing the same watch since I was a kid. Same expression on his face, as if nothing startled him anymore, but he was always prepared. He went in, sat down, looked at me and said, "So they finally broke you too, huh?" I didn't even question how he knew. I just nodded. He stayed with me all day, spoke with my nurse, asked probing questions, and discreetly paid for one of the tests that my insurance denied without making a fuss. Then he took out a tablet and began guiding me through the disaster I had left on autopilot. We went through everything. My name appeared on 5 distinct loan agreements, 3 credit cards, 2 utilities, and a car insurance policy for a vehicle I never drove. It was all so ingrained in my routine that I didn't recognize how awful things had gotten. Every time they hit a difficult patch, I stepped in softly and automatically, since I assumed that was what family meant. Fixing the flaws without asking anything in return. But they expected me to do it. When I didn't or couldn't, I became the issue. The drama. I was beginning to realize they hadn't simply relied on me. They had leaned through me. I was not even a person to them. I was a pressure valve, a cash dispenser, a family failing on whom they could rely as long as I didn't remind them of what they owed me in exchange. Gramps helped me create a list of every account and connection. Then we turned them off, one by one. I canceled the automatic deposit to Nora's checking account. She used to say she was barely scraping by, yet she'd flown to Miami 3 times this year and posted about each trip. She could now pay her own bills. Clara's rent deposit is gone. My mother's automobile insurance. She could call the provider herself. I withdrew my card information and updated my password, and I reported the loan I co-signed for Nora, which she had conveniently avoided discussing for months. I also filed a fraud report. Not because I intended to ruin her, but because I never pledged to be her backup plan indefinitely. I was done signing agreements for folks who refused to show up for me on a hospital bed. Gramps didn't say much, but every now and again he would say something softly, as if he was both disappointed and unsurprised. He was the only person who had ever told me the truth. Loyalty is only as strong as the people you are loyal to. By the time he departed that evening, the number of calls had doubled. My phone needed to be hushed. Mom had left voicemails, claiming she had just heard what had transpired. Clara was texting in all uppercase, expecting me to react quickly. Nora had gone quiet, which meant she was planning something worse. Then another note arrived from Dad. "This is serious. Call me right now. Everything is coming apart." There's still no mention of the hospital, not a single word regarding what occurred to me. Just panic. Not for me, but because they knew what was about to happen. The first domino had fallen. They simply didn't recognize I was the one who pushed it. I was still in the hospital when the fallout began. At first, it was the voicemail. 12, 2 dozen, and eventually so many that I lost counting. I played one on speaker to see what had changed. It was my mother. The tone she used was, "I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this isn't the way to do it." Not dread or concern, just frustration since the ATM was faulty. Nora followed up with a text. Initially there were no words, only a screenshot of her checking account. The balance was $29. Then she said, "What the hell is going on? Fix this." I glanced at the screen, felt my wrath rise for a moment, and then let it go. It wasn't new. It was simply louder now. Clara attempted a fresh angle. Her text was lengthier and more heartfelt. She stated she had no idea what was going on, and that she loved all of us and wished for peace. She closed it with, "Please don't punish me for things I didn't do," which was amusing given that the last time we spoke, she rolled her eyes when I informed her I couldn't co-sign another lease. Said I was being tough, then ignored me for 3 months. But it was my father who eventually crossed the line. He showed up to my apartment. Gramps warned me. He had noticed his automobile outside earlier, idling. I was still recovering, and not strong enough to walk without assistance. However, this did not prevent him from parking outside as if he were waiting for a captive to be released. I did not respond. Later that day, a text arrived. "You are ready to destroy everything we have built. I hope you realize the harm you're causing. Everything we built." The arrogance in that sentence made me laugh aloud. I read it again to ensure that I hadn't dreamed it. No apology, no mention of the hospital, and no concern for what had brought me there in the first place. It's just fear. They were afraid of losing their leverage, which they had accumulated over time. Then came the post. Nora uploaded a video. There was no music or voice, just a slow, dramatic walkthrough of my parents' absolutely vacant house. Not just cleared out, but kind of vacant. We were evicted with nothing. Front door is wide open. The living room was stripped. The dining table is gone. Even the drapes had been pulled down. The caption stated, "They took everything. Can you identify who let them?" I watched it once, then went onto my finance app and looked up the mortgage. It had defaulted again. They'd used the equity to pay off Nora's credit card debt and fund Clara's internet business idea. I'm not sure if it was a candle firm or a clothing boutique. It failed within 2 months. None of the funds had gone toward the mortgage. I warned them just once last year that if they didn't improve, I'd go. They did not believe me. So while I walked, the bank moved in. Gramps was present when I found the paperwork. I didn't say anything at first, simply scanned through the debt, late fines, and notices that I had never seen, because they had been delivered directly to my parents' address. He nodded once. Then he placed a couple calls. One to his lawyer, another to an old buddy in estate planning, and finally to his accountant, whom I had no idea existed until that day. What I learned next clarified everything. My family hadn't simply relied on me. They'd also been quietly probing about my granddad, especially after he retired. Clara had taken him to brunch twice, which was something she never did. Last year, Nora gave him a Christmas gift for the first time in a decade. Mom suggested during one of their phone chats that he start thinking about what's fair. He saw it all coming and had planned accordingly. Every asset, trust, and property he owned had already been relocated, not to punish them, but to safeguard it from them. And now he's renamed most of it mine. Not as a present or as a reward, but because I was the only one who hadn't requested it. I had demonstrated severely and unequivocally that I could manage without it, and that I did not feel entitled to a penny. In his words, that made me the only one deserving of it. That night, Nora arrived at the hospital. She was not on the list, so security did not let her in, but I could see her through the window. She was pacing the lot, phone in hand, and evidently talking to someone, most likely Clara. She was wearing sunglasses even though it was growing dark, as if she was preparing for a confrontation that never happened. She departed after 15 minutes. I thought that was the end of it. A final communication arrived an hour later. "I vow to God that you will be sorry if you do not repair this." There are no emojis, hearts, or hashtags, just that text. And it did not hit her in the way she expected. I did not feel intimidated, scared, or cornered. For the first time I felt nothing. I'd quit trying to be the son, brother, or fixer. Now I was free. It began with a knock on the hospital room door. I figured it was a nurse. It was not. A staff worker stepped in, slightly uneasy, and said, "There's a woman downstairs claiming to be your medical proxy. She says she's your sister and needs to speak with your doctor right away." I looked at her, puzzled at first. I hadn't identified anyone in my immediate family as an emergency contact. Only my grandfather. I asked who it was. She checked the notes. Clara. I nearly laughed. She hadn't texted me in days, hadn't paid me a visit, and hadn't even noticed my hospitalization until I cut off her rent help. And now she was attempting to speak for me. I informed them that no one was authorized. The hospital agreed and had security escort her away, preventing her from entering my room. I assumed she was just being dramatic. I was mistaken. A few hours later, Gramps stepped in with a manila envelope. He sat down after dropping it on the bed. Inside there were printed screenshots of an email exchange between my parents and a small law firm I had never heard of. They were looking into formal guardianship, expressly for me. I read it 3 times to be sure I understood. They were attempting to imply that I was ill, psychologically unstable, erratic, possibly suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or breakdown, and that my previous financial actions demonstrated a pattern of emotional instability. Their purpose was clear. If they could designate someone, preferably my father, as a temporary conservator, they could halt the financial reversals I'd already initiated. Restore access to accounts, re-establish credit, and restore control. They were trying to portray me as incompetent. These are the same individuals that didn't even check to see whether I was still alive 4 days earlier. I sat with it for a while. Gramps remained calm. He assured me that this was not new to him. Years ago, when my uncle attempted to leave the family for identical reasons, my parents discussed the notion as well. It never went anywhere. But now, with real money at risk, they were willing to try. They didn't call because they cared. They called because they were besieged. I stayed silent the remainder of the day. Not in a sad sense, but in a concentrated way. Something inside me clicked. I'd spent my entire life hoping they'd wake up, realize how much I'd given, and perhaps even apologize. However, they were not waking up. They were trying to change the story so that I was the villain. So I created a list. Every account, shared asset, every payment I'd set up to help over the years. My lawyer, whom Gramps referred me to, arrived that evening with documentation already in hand. The following morning we filed a cease and desist letter to both my sisters and parents, prohibiting them from contacting any of my doctors or impersonating medical proxies. Every bank institution to which I had ever given access with a family member was under fraud watch. A restraining order on property transfers in my name. If somebody attempted to sell or transfer an asset for which I had co-signed, a legal freeze would be triggered. I also had my HR department transfer all direct deposits to a new bank, one they had no idea existed, through a holding trust established by my grandfather's estate advisor. It was the first time in my life that I felt safe. Then the next hit arrived. Clara shared a video. Her makeup was dirty, the lighting was poor, and the camera shook just enough to appear raw. It began with her sniffling and concluded with her staring directly into the lens. She did not mention my name, but she spoke enough. There's someone in our family who's going through something dark. We're trying to help him, but he's lashing out and hurting people. We don't want to lose him, but we also can't keep letting him destroy everything we've built. Everything we have built. It was the same statement repeated, as if I had just walked into their empire and turned off the lights. The video took off quickly. Her pals began commenting. Cousins I hadn't communicated with in years sent strange texts. Even one of my old co-workers contacted me to see whether everything was all right. Nora shared it, adding a heart emoji and the words, "We're all praying for peace. Peace." After attempting to seize control of my life, money and health, they were not praying for peace. They were hoping I would fold. But I did not. Instead, I shared something of my own. Just one photo. I'm sitting up in the hospital bed next to my grandfather. Nothing spectacular, no lengthy caption, just this. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's restraint. No hashtags, no tags, and no drama. But I was confident it would come back to them, and it did. 2 hours later, Nora called. I didn't respond. She called again, then Clara, and then my mother. All missed calls. My father then sent me a final text message. We didn't want it to come to this. You are compelling us to do things we would never want to do. They still didn't understand it. They still believed they were in control, but they had no idea what would happen next. The letter arrived 2 days later, hand-delivered to the hospital and sealed in a crisp white envelope. I opened it, thinking they could be reaching out with something human. Instead, it was lawful. A notification of intent to seek emergency conservatorship over me. I read it twice before saying anything. They said I was psychologically incompetent to manage my own finances, and that my recent unpredictable behavior, including cutting them off, was evidence that I was spiraling. The letter mentioned emotional hardship, an inability to satisfy duties, and worries from my immediate family regarding my mental health following a cardiac incident. They were attempting to take everything officially. I contacted my lawyer right away. He wasn't astonished. According to him, this is not uncommon in dysfunctional families, especially when someone escapes the cycle of dependence. He informed me that they were trying to submit an emergency petition before I could appear in court. If they timed it correctly, and I missed my opportunity to speak, a judge could temporarily allow it. They had no idea that Gramps and his legal team had already moved. We filed a preemptive response, including notarized letters from my doctors verifying that I was mentally stable and in complete control of my decisions. We provided proof of income, correspondence logs, and a statement from my employer confirming that I had willingly taken time off, but was still actively working. The hearing was canceled before it ever made it to the court docket. They had nothing. Their lawyer discreetly withdrew, likely because he had been fed a family sob story and did not want the professional backlash. However, this did not end the slander effort. I started receiving strange texts from former pals. A girl I dated years ago messaged me, "Sorry to hear I was struggling." A former coworker emailed, wondering whether I needed help getting back on my feet. That's when I knew they were trying something different. Shifting the story, transforming my hospitalization into a breakdown, portraying my silence as proof that I'd gone insane, casting themselves as the only ones attempting to assist. And it could have worked if they hadn't been so sloppy about it. Nora couldn't keep her mouth closed. Clara couldn't ignore the interest. She shared another video. This time, full production was used, including emotive lighting, background piano music, and a soft filter. She discussed how mental illness does not always seem as you expect, how some scars are unseen, and how she simply wanted her brother back. She never mentioned my name, and she didn't have to. Her followers grabbed it up right away. The comment section was filled with sympathy, messages like, "You're so strong, praying for your family, he's lucky to have you." But one comment changed everything. Someone shared a screenshot of Nora's prior caption, "Family Day without the drama." The remark, which appeared alongside Clara's crying video, read, "So where was all this concern when he was actually in the hospital?" It went viral. The comments switched. Sympathy evolved to wrath. People started looking into Nora's previous posts, Pa's company accounts, and my father's former public-facing employment. What they discovered was not pretty. Nora had tagged me in the Family Day post when I was in the ICU. Clara tweeted 2 years ago about moochers who pretended to be traumatized. My mother had shared a birthday dinner photo just one day after the doctors informed her of my fall. It all resurfaced. Jen, an old high school classmate I hadn't seen in years, contacted out. She stated that she is currently working in the media. She remembered how things were with my family back then, and how strange it always appeared, even when we were teenagers. She claimed that the internet will only let lying go so far, and it did not. People began asking actual questions. Customers demanded refunds when Clara's small online business received a review bomb. Influencers have discreetly dropped her from collaborations. Nora's sponsorships vanished within days. After tagging her in an apologetic post, a brand with whom she had previously worked unfollowed her. My father's place of employment was also affected. One of his clients had noticed the viral threads and mentioned it at a meeting. He became defensive. HR was alerted. By the end of the week, he was on leave. Then they released him fully. Everything they'd built on lies and entitlement was falling before them. That's when my mother finally broke her silence. She sent a single text message. "Could we please talk?" There's no guilt trip or defense, just those 5 words. I looked at it for a long time. I didn't feel satisfied, not really. What I felt was detachment, as if the remarks came from someone I once knew in a life that no longer exists. I didn't respond. Instead, I launched my notes app and began noting the items I still needed to cut, cancel, and close. They'd finally gone too far. Not only with me, but with the story they were attempting to sell to everyone else. And they still didn't understand the one reality they'd never thought to examine. I was not angry. I was just finished. I assumed they would give up when the conservatorship effort failed. Following the public response, they lost their jobs, sponsors, and any remaining credibility. But I should have known better. Selfish people do not surrender. They adapt. I had just been released from the hospital, still feeble but capable of walking on my own. Gramps picked me up, gave me a drink, and informed me we were going to his place for a few days. I was fine with it. I didn't want to return to my flat. It still felt too near for them. We were halfway to his house when my phone vibrated. It was from an unknown number. "You should definitely come by the house. We need to talk immediately." It was Clara. I removed it without responding. Jen contacted me 2 hours later. Her voice was sharp and urgent. She told me to check Facebook. They'd posted something. Nora, Clara, and my mother, all standing in front of the old house. Behind them is a U-Haul truck. My father is over to the side clutching a box. They seemed distraught. Fake tears and soiled sweaters. Nora wrote the caption, "Losing everything hurts, especially when your own blood turned against you. But we've forgiven him. He is still our brother. We just want him to go home before it's too late." The comments were a battle zone. Half were strangers who offered assistance. The other half consisted of individuals calling them out. I wouldn't have cared until I saw the last photo in the post. A framed childhood photo of myself in Clara's hands with the phrase, "We're keeping a room ready. Family is forever." I wasn't sure whether to be angry or disturbed. It seemed like an emotional ransom. A digital performance designed to make me look like the villain while portraying themselves as victims eager to welcome me back. But the most surprising part happened the next day. I got a letter in the mail from the county clerk's office. Inside was a handwritten will, not from my grandfather, but from my father. A new one. It had been written a week following their botched conservatorship stunt. It listed his assets, which were now very few, and stated that if he died, everything would go to the remaining family members who maintained unity. And then, in shaky handwriting, Colton is disinherited until he returns to this family and reconciles. I looked at the paper for a long time. Then I laughed. Not because I wanted anything from him, I never did, but because the final play, the ultimate move, was always the same. A trap. One final attempt to reintegrate me into the system they created. The message was plain. Get back in line or be deleted. However, they overlooked one vital detail. I wanted to be erased. So I had my lawyer issue a letter in response. It included a legal waiver of any claim to the estate, a permanent no-contact notice, and a signed document removing them as emergency contacts or next of kin for any medical or legal issues involving me. It was basic, direct, and conclusive. They attempted to entice me with guilt, social media, money, and finally, legacy. I chose peace instead. Gramps and I moved out of state 2 weeks later. He mentioned that he wished to visit the mountains again. We purchased a little cabin just outside a peaceful town. I took a remote job, reduced my hours, and began reading and breathing again. Every now and again, someone from the past reaches out. A cousin, an old neighbor, or someone who is curious about what happened. I never explain because folks like Nora, Clara, and my parents are great storytellers. Stories in which they are constantly hurt, betrayed, and abandoned by someone cruel and troubled. Allow them to share their story. I have both truth and peace. Peace is preferable than being loved by those who only appreciate you when you are useful.